It is late at night, and you are doing something you promised yourself you would not do. You open your investment account. Not because anything is wrong. Your portfolio is fine. You are still on track. Nothing has collapsed. Nothing needs your attention. But then you see it. A stock you almost bought has risen again. Someone online posts a screenshot of a return that makes yours look painfully ordinary. Another headline says a new opportunity is creating fortunes faster than anyone expected. And suddenly, the money you have does not feel like enough. The return you were satisfied with yesterday now feels disappointing. You are not losing money. You just feel like you are losing the race. That feeling has ruined more investment plans than most people realize. Because once you believe you are falling behind, patience begins to feel like stupidity. Diversification begins to feel timid. A sensible plan starts looking like proof that you were not ambitious enough. So you begin searching. Maybe there is a better fund. Maybe you should own more technology. Maybe you should sell before the next crash. Maybe this time really is different. And before long, investing stops being about where you want to be 20 years from now. It becomes about what everyone else seems to be making today. This is not a video about finding the next great stock. This is not a video about predicting the next market crash. This is a video about why one of the hardest things in investing is doing less. John C. Bogle spent much of his life arguing for an idea that sounded almost embarrassingly simple. Instead of constantly trying to identify tomorrow's winners, own a broad piece of the market. Keep your costs low. Stay invested. Give businesses time to grow, and give compounding time to work. That philosophy became the heart of the little book of common sense investing. But there is something strange about Bogle's advice. The basic idea is easy to understand. You do not need an advanced degree in finance. You do not need to predict interest rates, elections, recessions, or which company will dominate the next decade. And yet intelligent people still find it almost impossible to leave a sensible investment plan alone. They trade. They switch strategies. They chase what has already risen. They panic when prices fall. They spend years trying to improve a process that may have worked better before they started touching it. Which leaves us with a question that is much deeper than index funds. If the mathematics is so simple, why do intelligent people keep fighting it? We will come back to that question. Because the answer has less to do with the market than you might think. It begins with something much closer. The person staring back at you from the screen. The first temptation is information. You tell yourself that the difference between average results and extraordinary results is simply knowing more. So you read more. You follow earnings reports. You watch central bank meetings. You listen to interviews with investors who sound certain about inflation, interest rates, oil prices, artificial intelligence, elections, currencies, and the next recession. At first, this feels responsible. You are learning. You are paying attention. You are becoming informed. But somewhere along the way, information can quietly change its role. It stops being a tool for understanding and becomes a promise of control. You begin to feel that because you know more, you should be able to know what happens next. That is where the trouble begins. Picture Daniel, a 38-year-old engineer. He is not a real person, but his situation is common. Daniel likes numbers. He reads carefully. He understands the basic logic of diversification. He knows that markets are uncertain. He starts well. A broad portfolio. Regular contributions. A long horizon. Then one company he almost bought rises sharply. He studies it and convinces himself that the move is justified. He buys. A few months later, the price falls. He tells himself the facts have changed. He sells. Then he notices a fund that performed extremely well the previous year. He studies the manager, reads the strategy, and switches part of his portfolio into it. That fund begins to lag. He changes again. Nothing Daniel does feels reckless while he is doing it. Each decision has an explanation. Each trade has a reason. Each change can be defended with a chart, a headline, a valuation, or a forecast. And that is exactly why intelligent investors can be so vulnerable. They are often good at creating reasons for the actions they already feel compelled to take. Here's the part most people miss. Being informed is not the same as being able to predict. You can understand a business and still be wrong about what its stock will do next. You can understand the economy and still be wrong about what markets have already priced in. You can correctly identify a recession and still lose money by selling too early, buying back too late, or assuming the market will move in a clean relationship with the economy. Knowledge matters. But knowledge does not cancel uncertainty. And markets are especially dangerous when knowledge creates the feeling that uncertainty has disappeared. There is another reason we keep interfering. Activity feels like control. Imagine a sharp market decline. Prices are falling. Headlines are moving quickly. Everyone seems to have an opinion. If you do nothing, you may feel passive. If you sell, you feel decisive. If you buy something new, you feel prepared. If you move money into cash, you feel protected. Action gives your anxiety somewhere to go. But a feeling of control is not the same as actual control. A portfolio can be damaged by decisions that felt intelligent at the moment they were made. The market does not reward you for effort. It does not pay you extra because you checked prices 10 times today. It does not care how many reports you read, how many podcasts you heard, or how strongly you believe your forecast. Sometimes the most difficult investment decision is to accept that nothing useful needs to be done. That sounds easy when markets are calm. It becomes almost unbearable when everyone around you seems to be getting rich faster. This is where investing becomes social. Suppose your plan is working. Your savings are growing. Your costs are low. Your portfolio is diversified. You are moving toward the life you actually want. Then someone tells you they doubled their money in a stock you ignored. Suddenly your own progress feels smaller. Nothing about your plan changed. Only the comparison changed. You stopped measuring your money against your goals and started measuring it against someone else's excitement. The ancient Greeks had a word that helps here, sophrosyne. It meant restraint, moderation, a soundness of mind that keeps desire from becoming command. That quality matters in investing because the market constantly places temptation in front of you. A new winner. A new fear. A new prediction. A new expert. A new reason why the old rules no longer apply. The challenge is not to become indifferent. The challenge is to notice the difference between information and instruction. Not every headline requires a response. Not every price movement is a message. Not every person getting rich faster than you is evidence that your plan is wrong. Sometimes simplicity feels uncomfortable because it gives the ego very little to do. There is no dramatic trade to announce. No brilliant forecast to prove. No heroic moment where you outsmart everyone else. You save. You invest. You wait. And in a culture that celebrates visible action, waiting can feel like failure. But perhaps the real question is not whether you can find a more exciting strategy. Perhaps it is whether you can stay with a sensible one long enough for it to matter. In the 1970s, the investment world was built around a familiar belief. Professional managers would study companies, choose the best securities, avoid the worst ones, and earn superior returns for their clients. That was the product. Expertise. Selection. Judgment. Then John Bogle came along with an idea that sounded almost insulting in its simplicity. What if an ordinary investor did not try to find the best manager? What if the investor simply owned a broad slice of the market at very low cost and held it? The first retail index fund associated with Bogle had a difficult beginning. It raised far less money than its supporters had hoped, and critics treated the idea as uninspired. Why would anyone willingly settle for average? If you value quiet conversations about money, behavior, and the ideas behind lasting wealth, consider subscribing. Because this is where Bogle's simple philosophy becomes much harder to dismiss. That question sounds reasonable until you look at what average actually means. Suppose the market is made up of all investors together. Some investors will do better than the market. Some will do worse. Before costs, their results have to add up to the market itself. This is the arithmetic William Sharpe later made famous in his discussion of active management. The logic is almost embarrassingly plain. If one investor beats the market, another investor, somewhere, must hold the other side of that relative result. Collectively, active investors cannot all be above average at the same time. Then costs arrive. Management fees. Trading costs. Taxes in taxable accounts. Research expenses. Turnover. Every dollar removed by cost is a dollar that no longer compounds for you. So the problem is not that active investing can never work. Of course, some investors outperform. The problem is that all investors cannot outperform together, and no one knows in advance with certainty who the future winners will be. This changes the question. Instead of asking, how do I find the person who will beat the market? Bogle asks something closer to this. How much of the market's return can I keep? That is a quieter question. It is also a powerful one. There is a subtle shift in perspective here. Most investing conversations begin with return. Which asset will earn the most? Which manager has the best record? Which sector will lead next? Bogle begins one step earlier. Before asking how much you might earn, ask how much of whatever the market earns can remain in your hands. That sounds less ambitious, but it changes the entire game. A higher gross return can still become a worse personal result if it comes with higher fees, more turnover, more taxes, and more chances to make emotional mistakes. A modest-looking strategy can become surprisingly powerful when very little is being taken away from it year after year. And the longer the horizon, the more those small differences matter. A fee that looks harmless in 1 year does not disappear. It is money that can no longer earn a return next year, or the year after that. The same is true of a bad decision made in panic. The cost is not only what you lose today. It may also be the growth that lost capital never gets the chance to produce. This is one reason Bogle kept returning to simplicity. Not because simple is always superior. But because every layer of complexity should have to justify the cost it creates. Because wealth does not depend only on what you earn. It also depends on what you do not give away. But it runs deeper than that. The visible costs are only the beginning. There is also the cost of intervention. Every time you switch strategies, you create another point where emotion can enter. Every time you chase a winner, you risk buying after enthusiasm has already raised the price. Every time you flee a decline, you risk turning a temporary fall into a permanent loss and then facing the impossible question of when to return. Every decision creates another opportunity to be right. And another opportunity to be wrong. Now compare Daniel with Sarah. Sarah is also a composite example. She is not an investment genius. She does not know which company will dominate 10 years from now. She does not know where interest rates will be next year. She does not know when the next recession will begin. She knows something smaller. She knows she can save a fixed amount regularly. She knows she can own a broad, low-cost portfolio. She knows she can keep contributing when markets rise and when they fall. So that is what she does. Month after month. Year after year. There will be years when this feels almost foolish. A concentrated bet will beat her diversified portfolio. A famous manager will have an extraordinary run. A neighbor will tell her about an investment that seems to rise every week. Then there will be years when fear takes over and people who once laughed at caution suddenly want nothing but cash. Sarah does not need to predict which mood comes next. Her advantage is not that she avoids every decline. She cannot. Her advantage is that her plan was built with declines in mind before the decline arrived. That distinction matters. A strategy that only works when you feel confident is not a long-term strategy. It is a fair-weather strategy. From the outside, Sarah barely seems to be investing at all. There are no dramatic calls. No frantic changes. No predictions. But something is happening underneath the silence. At first, most of the growth in her account comes from the money she adds herself. Then the balance gets larger. Returns begin earning returns. Years pass. The capital starts doing more of the work. This is compounding, but the word is so familiar that we often forget what it means emotionally. Compounding asks you to accept a strange bargain. For a long time, the result may look unimpressive. Then, if you give it enough time, the same process begins to produce outcomes that would have been difficult to create through saving alone. The difficulty is that the exciting part comes late. The temptation comes early. This is why getting rich slowly can feel harder than getting rich quickly. Quick wealth asks you to believe in an opportunity. Slow wealth asks you to believe in a process long before the process becomes impressive. The old Latin phrase festina lente means make haste slowly. It sounds contradictory. But investing is full of contradictions like this. The harder you try to force speed, the more likely you are to interrupt the mechanism that needs time. You chase. You trade. You concentrate. You borrow. You jump from one idea to another. And each attempt to accelerate the process creates another way to destroy it. Long-term investing is not slow because nothing is happening. It is slow because the most powerful part of the process is happening quietly. There's a second layer to this. Bogle's philosophy is not only about adding the right investments. It is also about removing the wrong behaviors. The Latin idea via negativa describes improvement through subtraction. Instead of asking what else you can add, you ask what can be removed. Remove unnecessary fees. Remove unnecessary turnover. Remove unnecessary complexity. Remove the need to predict every major event. Remove the habit of checking prices until every movement feels personal. Remove the belief that your portfolio must always be exciting. This is wealth by subtraction. And it leads to one of the strangest truths in investing. Sometimes the most valuable investment decision is the decision you refuse to make. That becomes clearest during a market fall. Imagine an ordinary morning. You wake up, reach for your phone, and see a notification. Markets are down sharply. You open your account. Red numbers. You open the news. Panic. Recession. Crash. Billions erased. Experts are explaining why the decline could continue. You have heard these words before. You know your plan. You told yourself this money was for 20 years. You chose a broad portfolio because you accepted that markets would sometimes fall. You knew all of this when prices were calm. But now the future feels different. 20 years has disappeared. There is only today. There is only the red number on the screen. And there is a button. Sell. Your finger is a few centimeters away. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. You already know what your plan says. The question is whether you can remain the person who made that plan when fear arrives. This is where we can finally return to the question from the beginning. If the mathematics is so simple, why do intelligent people keep fighting it? Because mathematics does not feel fear. Compounding does not read headlines. An index does not envy another investor. A spreadsheet does not panic. But you do. You live inside a nervous system built to respond to danger. You live in a social world where other people's success changes how your own success feels. You live in a culture that confuses activity with seriousness. And you carry an ego that would often rather be wrong in an interesting way than average in a profitable one. That is why the hardest part of long-term investing is not choosing a long-term strategy. It is remaining a long-term person. Sit with that for a second. You can understand compounding and still destroy it. You can understand diversification and still abandon it. You can know that panic selling is dangerous and still sell in a panic. You can read every great book about investing and still discover, at the worst possible moment, that knowledge and temperament are not the same skill. If this way of thinking about money is useful to you, consider subscribing for more conversations about investing, behavior, and long-term thinking. This is where Bogle's philosophy starts to look less passive. To follow it, you may have to withstand boredom. You may have to watch other people make more money for a while. You may have to remain calm while headlines tell you the world has changed forever. You may have to admit that you do not know what happens next. You may have to accept that a simple strategy does not make you look clever. That requires discipline. Not the dramatic discipline of waking up at 4 in the morning or staring at 6 screens. A quieter discipline. The discipline to continue. The discipline to leave a sensible plan alone. The discipline to let uncertainty exist without turning it into a command. Then come back to the screen. Your finger is still near the sell button. Nothing outside has changed. The market is still down. The headlines are still frightening. You still do not know what tomorrow will bring. But something inside the decision has changed. You close the app. No applause. No reward. No dramatic feeling of victory. Maybe the market falls again tomorrow. Maybe it recovers. You do not know. But sometimes discipline in investing looks exactly like this. Nothing happened because you refused to make something happen. Notice what just happened. Inaction has been reframed. Not as laziness. Not as ignorance. Not as passivity. As discipline. And that brings us to 3 things worth remembering. First, you do not need to capture every winner to participate in long-term economic growth. A broad, low-cost portfolio accepts that you will own companies that disappoint you and companies that surprise you. You will never have only the winners. That is the price of not needing to identify them in advance. Average can sound unimpressive. But market returns, kept at low cost and allowed to compound for long periods, can become far more powerful than the word average suggests. Second, your behavior is part of your return. Fees matter. Taxes matter. Costs matter. But fear matters too. Envy matters. Overconfidence matters. The urge to switch strategies matters. You do not only need an investment plan that makes sense on paper. You need one you can live with when prices fall, when friends brag, when forecasts sound convincing, and when doing nothing feels unbearable. A strategy you abandon at the first serious test was never really your strategy. Third, wealth grows when you give time something worth protecting from yourself. You will still see people getting rich faster. You will still watch investments rise that you did not buy. You will still feel the pull of the new thing, the urgent thing, the thing everyone suddenly believes cannot lose. The goal is not to stop feeling temptation. The goal is to stop mistaking temptation for instruction. So ask yourself a specific question. What has been harder for you as an investor, knowing what to do, or resisting the urge to change what you already decided? You may never know which stock will win next year. You may never predict the next crash. You may never be the smartest person in the market. But perhaps you never needed to be. You only needed a sensible plan, enough humility to trust it, and enough patience to let time finish what you started.